The dead moon of Phalos 4 didn't spin anymore. Its crust was a scarred, silent grave, blackened ridges of vitrified stone sweeping across a surface that hadn't known atmosphere in tens of thousands of years. No winds, no weather, just the soundless, crushing stillness of a rock that had once burned with life and now lay entombed beneath 1,000 layers of denial. And Erin Voss was digging through it like a woman possessed. Her suit's external vents hissed steam into the vacuum as she dropped to one knee, brushing soot off what looked like an archway embedded in the collapsed ruin. Her hand trembled slightly as it passed over the contours, a flicker of tension running up her spine. Her breath caught, not from exertion, but from the sudden, irrational certainty that she was about to change everything she knew. Her gloved fingers moved quickly, reverently, tracing the geometric pattern carved into the stone. It was too clean, too angular, and it matched nothing in the Concord's databases. Her breath hitched, just slightly, as something primitive twisted in her gut. Awe, dread, recognition. That's the 4th pre-fusion architectural anomaly in a 50-meter radius, muttered Jules, her assistant, through the comms. No rebar, no syntcrete, no local material signature. This thing wasn't built by anything native to this moon. Erin didn't respond. Her breathing had slowed. She leaned in closer, eyes narrowing behind her visor. There were symbols, faint, worn, carved into the inside of the arch. Not just alien symbols, human ones. Old Terran script, classical Latin, half erased by time, but unmistakable. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Take a scan," she whispered. Jules approached, his helmet's camera blinking to life as he knelt beside her. There was a slight edge to his tone, cautious and disbelieving. "Looks like a military insignia. What the hell is this?" "Earth didn't reach this sector until 4,000 years ago," Erin finished. "I know, but this ruin predated Concord charts by at least 90 millennia." She rose slowly, eyes scanning the horizon of half-submerged spires, melted towers, and broken causeways. She'd come to this moon chasing a whisper, anomaly pings buried deep in subspace radiation signatures that didn't match any Concord-era engines. Everyone said it was a dead rock, a burned colony, nothing worth salvaging. But the bones told a different story. She turned. "Start phase 2. I want every drone airborne. We're mapping this entire site. Now." Jules hesitated. "Erin, if the Concord flags this as a heritage-class ruin." "They won't. But if they do, then they'll bury it again, just like the others." That silenced him. The last time she'd uncovered a non-Concord-aligned ruin, the coordinates had been erased from every shared archive within a day. Her credentials had been flagged. Her funding cut. That site had been absorbed into the Historical Integrity Oversight Program, a Concord euphemism for making inconvenient truths vanish. Not this time. This time, she'd come in alone. No university. No sponsors. Just an exoarchaeologist with a bad reputation and military-grade equipment she wasn't supposed to own. Jules launched the drones. Tiny silver wasps burst from the canister on his back, fanning out in concentric circles across the ruins. Real-time mapping feeds began populating Erin's HUD, three-dimensional scans rising from nothing like ghosts clawing out of ash. And there, near the center of the ruined complex, was the shape of something very wrong. A chamber. Circular. Deep. And lined with sarcophagi. She zoomed in on one of the internal scans. It showed a preserved skeleton inside, strangely intact, given the exposure. 2 arms. 2 legs. Human skull structure. And next to it, sealed inside the tomb, an Earth-standard sidearm. Erin's voice was ice. "Get me inside that chamber. Cut a path if you have to." Jules paused. "Erin, this isn't just pre-Concord. This is pre-everything. Then history's about to change." She looked back at the symbol on the archway, now glowing faintly under the sweep of a drone's spectral light. It wasn't just a military insignia. It was the emblem of the First Terran Rebellion, a lost conflict referenced only in fragmented myths and suppressed academic theories. One Erin had chased through half-buried anomalies and blacklisted data clusters. She'd never had proof. Until now. A war no one remembered, because someone had made sure they wouldn't. The alert hit their comms like a thunderclap. Unregistered excavation detected. Site is now under Concord Authority Suppression Order 9 to 14. Cease all activity. Prepare for asset retrieval. A Concord patrol ship had entered low orbit. Erin stared up at the sky. "Too late," she whispered. Her fingers hovered for half a second, just long enough to acknowledge what this might cost. Then she transmitted the scans. All of them. Full spectrum. Broadcasted blind into open net space. Untraceable. Viral. Let them come. The truth was out. And humanity had just lit a fuse buried for 90,000 years. The Concord patrol ship hung over Phalos for like a silent executioner. Erin's chest tightened as she stared up at its silhouette, a pulse of old instinct prickling along her spine. The same kind of dread she'd felt back in the ruins of Terralise, just before the Concord erased an entire rebellion with a single bureaucratic decree. Erin Voss watched the orbital shadow crawl across her HUD as its hull shimmered with the signature luster of Concord Authority stealth alloys, gleaming like a dagger dipped in oil. No lights, no insignia, but she knew the silhouette. Everyone who'd ever stepped too far outside the Council's carefully curated truth recognized that shape. The vigilant crown. A slow, familiar chill coiled through her gut. She had seen this ship class once before, during the fringe riots on Terralise Minor. It hadn't fired a shot. It hadn't needed to. Jules swore under his breath. That's a full, diplomatic interdiction cruiser. No guns showing. But they've got soft kill suites that can melt every circuit we're carrying. Erin turned from the scan feed, her face hard behind the visor. They're not here to kill us. Not yet. They're here to erase. Exactly. The comms flared again. A different voice this time. Calm, synthetic, but with that barely concealed disdain the Concord perfected over millennia. Erin Voss, citizen of the Terran Confederation. Your excavation violates Section 3.1 of the Concord Heritage Preservation Act. You are instructed to stand down, secure your data, and submit to retrieval protocols. Compliance will be rewarded with leniency. Jules glanced at her. Are we complying? Erin didn't answer. She walked to the rover, opened a secure case, and pulled out an old device that didn't exist in any Concord registry. A microburst quantum entangler. Military surplus. Probably illegal in 17 systems. I'm going to make sure what we found goes farther than they can reach. You already broadcasted the scans. Not the location. Not the bones. Not this. She keyed a signal. Somewhere deep beneath the ash, one of the sarcophagi clicked. Jules froze. Wait. You're opening one. She didn't reply. The signal lit her visor with internal telemetry, biomass readings, low-level radiation, and something else. Faint magnetic shielding patterns within the tomb. Old-world tech. Buried and forgotten. The tomb's lid split with a sigh and hissed out a coil of cryovapor. Inside, perfectly intact, was a soldier. Erin's breath hitched. For a moment, all sound seemed to vanish inside her helmet. Awe, disbelief, and a jolt of something close to fear collided in her chest. This wasn't just history. It was a ghost from humanity's buried past, staring back at her through time. Not a skeleton. A preserved body. Skin still pale. Hair still short. Armor still bearing the Earth Eagle and a nameplate. LTM, SHAI. Jesus, Jules breathed. He's been frozen for 90,000 years. No, Erin whispered. He's been hidden for 90,000 years. She stared, transfixed, at the man's face. Young, stern, lips parted slightly as though caught mid-command. He looked like he could wake up any second. Her screen lit up with proximity warnings. The Concord cruiser was deploying a shuttle. She turned to Jules. Get the data slates. The backup drives. Now, I want this site stripped of evidence before they land. And the body? She looked down at Lieutenant Shai's face. That's not a body. That's a witness. The shuttle hit the regolith with surgical indifference. Four Concord Authority marshals emerged, their armor matte black and featureless, faces hidden behind polarized helmets. One carried a containment module. Another held a pulse rifle, not quite aimed, but not pointed away either. Their leader approached. Dr. Voss, you are now under direct oversight of the Office of Historical Stewardship. As of this moment, this site and its contents are reclassified under Article 0. You are instructed to withdraw and delete all unauthorized data. Erin stepped forward, voice even. On whose authority? On that of Galactic Concord High Counselor Virek Thal. Jules paled. That's not a suppression order. That's a legacy clause. Erin's stomach dropped. Legacy clauses were invoked for one reason only: when history itself was at risk. Hours later, the ruins were quiet again. The marshals had swept through with digital sterilizers and data purges. Jules had been detained. The drones were gone. Most of the equipment had been vaporized. But they hadn't found everything. Inside a crater a half-kilometer from the main site, buried beneath a sealed shelter, Erin crouched beside a hardline uplink. The signal she'd sent wasn't just broadcasting, it was cascading. The data was already replicating itself across backdoor relay chains, university blacknets, old war SAC ghosts, and Terran embassies. It was mutating through hidden protocols, piggybacking on idle traffic, slipping past Concord filters like smoke through armor plating. The truth was now a contagion, spreading through hundreds of hidden nodes, bouncing off relay buoys, reaching corners of the galaxy that hadn't heard Earth's name in generations. She pulled up the last data feed. One more transmission. Just a whisper. He woke up. The message blinked through encrypted pathways toward a classified research vault on Mars, flagged for a name few dared speak aloud. Admiral Kalen Myrov, retired, Earth Defense Intelligence. And she didn't send it to Earth. She sent it to Mars. The first thing Lieutenant Marcus Shy did upon waking was reach for a weapon. His body moved with sharp, instinctive precision, despite the 91,000 years that had passed. In that first breath, before thought could catch up, memory surged. The flash of plasma fire over trench lines, the hiss of a downed comms array, and a final order shouted into static. Hold the line, no matter what. That was the last thing he remembered before the cold closed in and time forgot his name. Cryogel flaked from his skin in translucent sheets as he sat up, muscles flexing under armor that still hummed faintly with residual charge. The cold stink of old oxygen, resurrection fluid, and scorched polymer filled his lungs as he took a breath that hadn't been drawn since before the Concord rewrote the stars. For a flicker of a second, a battlefield flashed behind his eyes. Screams, smoke, the sound of orbital strikes pounding the surface of Vyrek-held outposts. His eyes snapped open, gold brown, sharp, alert. The chamber lights were dim, artificial, flickering faintly with backup power. Dust hung like a slow-falling mist in the thin gravity of the shelter. Instruments blinked in silent loops, automated systems humming a lullaby they'd repeated for eons. Erin Voss didn't move. She stood just outside the tomb's entry threshold, silhouetted by the pulsing amber of the uplink core, her frame still encased in her exofield suit. One hand rested on the grip of her sidearm. Not drawn, not hostile, just ready. Her eyes weren't on her weapon, though. They were on him. A man who shouldn't exist. Marcus's gaze swept the room. Fast. Efficient. Military. He noted the artificial gravity, the air composition, the faint Terran insignia on Erin's shoulder, the rusted joints on the doorframe, and the drone's scanning lasers casting weblight across the walls. Recognition flashed in his face, but no words came yet. His hand dropped from the cryo couch's edge to his hip. No holster. No weapon. He exhaled, slow and measured. Status, he said. His voice was raw stone, dry, rumbling, but clear. Not a question. An order. Erin stepped forward cautiously. Lieutenant Marcus Shy. Designation Echo Sentinel 11. You were interred in cryostasis approximately 91,000 years ago under emergency archival protocols. The facility you were in was buried during a strategic concordal seismic strike on Phalos 4 shortly after the fall of the First Terran Rebellion. I'm Dr. Erin Voss. Civilian. Exoarchaeologist. Human. Independent. She let the last word hang like a challenge. Marcus blinked once. His expression didn't shift, but his left hand clenched slightly against his thigh. Maybe grief. Maybe instinct. Maybe just the muscle memory of a man who wasn't ready to accept the war was over. Is the rebellion over? The question landed heavy. Erin swallowed, then nodded. Yes, you lost. He closed his eyes. Just for a heartbeat. No rage. No grief. Just the acceptance of a soldier trained to outlive the news he feared. And the Concord? He asked. She exhaled. Still here. Still ruling. But they're not as confident as they pretend. You've been declared an Article 0 threat. They erased your rebellion from the histories. They've reclassified your entire movement as myth. Ghost stories. Cult propaganda. He opened his eyes again. This time, something burned in them. Then I wasn't buried. I was hidden. The shelter was ancient, but hardened, shielded against concordal scans with old-world stealth arrays and self-repairing infrastructure. It had been designed to wait. It had waited well. Erin gave Marcus water, nutrient infusions, re-entry patches for his joints. The man took them without complaint, mechanically, like rituals half remembered. Then she started feeding him history. Her fingers hovered over the data slate before she pressed play. For a moment, her resolve flickered. This wasn't just information. This was betrayal wrapped in pixels and proof. Part of her feared what it would do to him. Would it crush his will? Would it enrage him beyond reason? Would he even believe her? She'd built her career chasing ghosts, but now one of them was standing in front of her, breathing. And it was up to her to show him just how thoroughly his cause had been buried. Erin exhaled and activated the slate. "You deserve to see what they took," she said, her voice low. "And what they left behind." She hesitated as she activated the first slate. What if it broke him? What if the truth was too much? But she'd already made her choice. He had to know. And deep down, she needed to see if the myth could still fight. If anything from that era had survived intact. Flash drives, data slates, holograms of the last 9 millennia, the rise of the galactic Concord, the consolidation of the trifold species, the Halanth, the Kothari, and the Virek as galactic arbiters, the rewriting of the stellar compact into a moralistic, knowledge-controlling empire, humanity's own rise, stunted, mistrusted, yet tolerated, the loss of Earth's frontier autonomy, the disappearance of hundreds of dissident colonies under the veil of bio-collapse or internal unrest. Marcus said nothing, but his eyes never looked away. At one point, she showed him a still frame, the vigilant crown hovering over Phalos 4. He stared at it like a man looking at an old nightmare reborn. "They still build ships with cloaked hulls and energy suppression hull plating?" he asked. "Yes," Erin said. He grunted. "Coward's armor. You knew about the Concord before the fall." Marcus's jaw clenched. Before they called themselves that. They were the arbitration compact. Trade brokers turned peacekeepers turned overlords. "We tried diplomacy. Then we tried law. Then we ran out of options." She nodded. "And then came the rebellion. You don't know what that means." "I'm trying to." His gaze turned away. "I watched comrades atomized under white flags," he said. "Whole planets sterilized for refusal to integrate. I watched them erase languages, memories, bloodlines. I held a child that coughed up starfire because their mother was in the wrong orbit when the cleansing beams hit." He turned back to her. The rebellion wasn't about freedom. It was about survival. Erin said nothing. There was nothing to say. Mars. A vault buried beneath kilometers of iron-rich stone and centuries of political paranoia. Inside, the emergency signal blinked to life like a reborn pulse. A man in his 60s, lean, gaunt, battle-worn, sat hunched over a secure console. Admiral Kalen Myrov, retired. Once the architect of Earth's strategic defense grid. Once the head of the forgotten Arc Division. Now just a ghost with clearance codes no one dared deactivate. The signal decrypted. Identity tags verified. Marcus shy. He didn't move for a full minute. Then, "Get me the Arc Division." His aide stammered. "Sir, Arc is dissolved. Officially since the Bale Treaty. Unfunded. Unstaffed. Then get me what's left." "But they're scattered." "Most of them are." "Wake them up." Myrov rose, his joints stiff, his fingers trembling slightly as he keyed in a code that hadn't been used in over 200 years. Omega Protocol. Echo Sentinel verified. Sapphire Station. A neutral diplomatic hub, orbiting the dust-choked world of Kirill 4. Erin stood in the window of a Terran embassy safe house. If embassy could describe a reinforced vault 3 decks below the actual delegation offices. The view was synthetic. Projected. Outside, the real starfield shimmered under particle shields, but here, in the observation hollow, it was rendered like Earth's own sky. Orion. Cassiopeia. Faint traces of the solar arc. She stood alone, wrapped in silence, until Marcus joined her. He wore a fresh uniform now. Terran weave. Armor core underlay. No decoration. No rank. Just the stylized eagle, black on gray. He looked older somehow. Not physically, but in weight. He said nothing. Neither did she. Then she turned to him. "What now?" He looked at the stars. "They erased our war, but not our weapons. There are caches. Signals. Codes baked into the stellar lattice." She raised a brow. You mean physical networks? I mean old fire. He turned to her. Their greatest mistake wasn't burying me. It was thinking I wouldn't leave a trail. She stepped closer. They'll come for you. They always do. And when they find you? Marcus shy smiled. Just a little. Just enough. They'll remember what it means to fear the forgotten. Far above, a concordal node council received the transmission ping. A man-long declared myth had returned. And across a dozen worlds, ancient Terran black sites began to stir. Old satellites realigned, like the Zephyr 9 relay, long dormant, blinking its signal toward the edge of Hallant space. Others, buried in asteroid belts or moons, stirred from digital sleep. Buried algorithms activated, Sablefire, Latchkey, Vindicate, each one keyed to a threat index the Concord no longer believed in. The rebellion was no longer history. It was legacy. And now, it was awake. They arrived at dawn. Not Earth dawn, but the cold blue sunrise of Kirill 4, a glacial light that spilled across the embassy spires of Saphar Station and turned the steel and polyglass structures to pale bone. The sky above was black and brilliant, a sprawl of stars bisected by the slow curve of the station's planetary ring. Beautiful, indifferent, the kind of place tyrants loved to make disappearances feel clean. And this time, they didn't send diplomats. They sent enforcers. Concord Authority dropships came in hard and silent. No registry signals, no orbital warning. Their hulls bore no insignia, just the dull gray of procedural violence. By the time they were visible, it was already too late. They didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They executed Article 0. The Safe House's alert system gave Erin 30 seconds. That was enough. Her pulse slammed into high gear, breath sharp in her throat. She yanked Marcus from the simulation grid, his expression unreadable, calm in that terrifying soldier way. They're here, she said. He didn't ask who. He grabbed the pack, the slates, and the old beacon core, still running off a scavenged nanoreactor from Phalos 4. In a single movement, he keyed the escape route, a vent shaft wired into the old diplomatic corridors built before the Concord had standardized architecture. Erin followed. Behind them, the door blew inward. The first Concord Marshal through the breach died to a tripwire-shaped charge. The second managed 2 steps before the auto-turret reduced him to shrapnel. The rest waited, calculating angles, calling for reinforcements. But Marcus and Erin were already gone. They ran through old infrastructure, sealed tunnels lit by emergency strips, walls lined with pre-Concord Terran signage. Marcus moved like he belonged here, like the muscle memory of his ancestors still haunted the stone. Where does this lead, he asked. A comms relay under the old cargo quarter. It's off-grid, disconnected from the Concord web. We can reach Myrov. Good. We'll need him. You think Arc Division's ready? Marcus didn't answer. Not with words. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a shard of alloy. Curved, black, and humming faintly. What is that? Not what, he said. Who? He pressed the shard to the wall. It bloomed. A projection lit the tunnel in stuttering blue light. Schematics, tactical overlays, name tags, and ancient Terran glyphs. One glowed brightest. Threshold protocol online. Arc's already moving, Marcus said. We're not the only ones who woke up. Admiral Myrov stood inside the Arc Division command vault, deep below Mars. The place hadn't breathed in a century. Dust coated everything but the core, still warm, still waiting. Operators, some retired, some in hiding, some only alive because no one thought to erase them, were returning to stations like ghosts summoned from old war prayers. Target? One asked. Myrov pointed to the relay feeds. Saphar Station. Exfil underway. Full Concord suppression force inbound. What's our directive? He stared at the sigil glowing on the command table. Echo Sentinel active. Our directive, he said, voice low, is to remind the galaxy what happens when you bury Terran history and leave the roots to rot. Prepare the bleed routes. Secure fallback points in the Hallant periphery. And the Concord fleet. Myrov looked up. We go loud. On Saphar Station, the tunnels shook. Not from gunfire, but from the sound of distant, forbidden engines powering up. Marcus paused as the floor vibrated. A faint tremor ran up his spine, and his fingers curled instinctively around the beacon core. His eyes narrowed. That's not Concord, Erin said. No, Marcus said. That's ours. And in the dark below them, an ancient Terran dreadnought, buried beneath diplomatic substructure since the first treaties were signed, came online for the first time in 91,000 years. It was called the Righteous Memory, and it remembered everything. The siege of Tarsus Alpha, the betrayal at the Halanth Accord, the orbital dead dropped over Carey's Prime. It remembered every name the Concord tried to scrub from the stars. And now, it would remind the galaxy one last time. The launch bay of the Righteous Memory groaned awake like a god pulling breath after a long, bitter sleep. Ancient machinery stirred beneath layers of forgotten dust. Fuel lines, dormant since before the Concord had its first council chamber, before the Treaty of Elian, before the Virek ever walked upright, hissed as cryo-sealed gates unlocked. Hydraulic arms the size of shuttlecraft stretched and clicked into motion. Lights that hadn't flickered in 100 millennia blinked on one by one, illuminating catwalks draped in dust and age, casting long shadows across steel bones forged before the rise of any alien empire. Magnetic clamps disengaged with a seismic crack that rippled through the buried substructure of Sapar Station. Pressure equalizers screamed as launch gantries rotated into position. The dreadnought, terrible, silent, patient, rose. It rose not with the clinical elegance of Concord designs, but with the will of something born for fury and forged for survival. No sleek lines. No ceremonial hull. Just a massive, armored beast hewn from a time when humanity didn't beg for peace. Marcus stood in the central lift cradle, hands clenched behind his back as the floor ascended through layers of interlocked chambers. His stance was a study in restraint. Underneath the recycled uniform, black and unmarked, his chest rose with controlled rhythm, like he was sinking his breath to the beat of ancient war drums. Beside him, Erin's breath hitched. The chamber walls around them shifted in seamless choreography, metal slats folding and locking away like the petals of a warforged flower. "How many?" she asked, voice barely more than breath. Marcus didn't turn. Original crew complement was 7,000. She blinked. And now? He tapped a display on the bulkhead. 6 dots blinked green. "We'll manage with 6. 6. ARC sent the best of what's left. 2 tacticians, fleet-class veterans. 1 engineer who used to patch quantum cores with her bare hands. A pilot bred in vacuum. And you." For a moment, Erin's breath caught. Not from fear, but from the realization that she wasn't a bystander anymore. The galaxy had rewritten its lies atop the bones of her people, and she was holding a match soaked in truth. She gave him a hard look. "I'm not a soldier. You're worse. You're a truth-teller. That's what they hate most." The lift crested into the command spire. Erin had seen warships before, Concord corvettes, embassy patrol ships, the skeletal remains of outer rim frigates picked clean by scavengers, but nothing like this. The bridge of the Righteous Memory was a cathedral to resistance. Tiered stations wrapped the core like concentric circles of a ritual site. Brass rails. Reinforced glass. No automation she could see, just brutal, beautiful machinery, operated by human hands. The banners still hung. Blackfield. Crimson Edge. A stylized eagle with broken chains in its talons. The air smelled like iron and electricity. Marcus stepped forward. No hesitation. He placed his hand on the core interface. It pulsed once. Recognized him. Iden confirmed. Shy Marcus. Echo Sentinel status, active. Command protocols unlocked. The ship shuddered, like it exhaled. Ancient systems came online one after another. Cryo-sealed bulkheads disengaged. Long-range comms towers unfolded. Turret rings activated, aligning themselves with ghostly precision. Tactical overlays appeared on the central holopit, data flowing in from ancient, self-contained satellite constellations that had never been decommissioned, just waiting. Erin stepped toward the nearest console, heart pounding. These systems, they've been operating blind for 90,000 years. Not blind, the engineer, a woman named Eska, said as she joined them. Her voice was gravel and static. Asleep. Dreaming. The ship's submines have been running resistance scenarios and deep cycle logic loops the whole time. Updating. Adapting. Erin turned. "You're saying the ship itself has been preparing for war?" Eska smirked. "It never stopped being at war." Admiral Myrov stood inside the Arc Division vault on Mars, hands folded behind his back, watching a feed encrypted through a Terran relic buoy no Concord system could track. The Righteous Memory was moving. Operators manned terminals, some shaking with awe, others grim-faced and quiet. Tactical feeds flared to life as Concord scout vessels on the Halanth perimeter picked up energy surges. One operator gasped. "That waveform, it's Dreadnought class." "Impossible," another muttered. That profile hasn't been seen since before the schism. No, Myrov said, voice low. It's very possible. That's the sound of consequence. He keyed a relay. Activate the relay ghosts. I want arc signals firing from every dead beacon on the periphery within the hour. If we're going loud, we're going louder than they can silence. Across Mars, old bunkers opened. Automated turrets emerged from riverbeds. Drones long believed inert lit up like angry stars. The fire was spreading. On Sapor Station, debris fell like snow. The righteous memory tore through the substructure, emerging into space with zero ceremony and total menace. Its hull bore the scars of past battles, blackened lines, fused plating, but it moved like a predator unleashed. Concord vessels scrambled. Alerts flooded diplomatic channels. Orders clashed in command queues. Erin stood beside the tactician, a woman called Thorne, watching drones converge. 36 bogies, Thorne said, her eyes glowing with neural overlays. 2 frigates. Rest are drone-class gnats. They'll swarm, blind our sensors, then bleed us. Marcus strode onto the bridge like he was born for it. Spin up the flak grid, he said. Bring main lance online. Direct fire mode. The ship didn't wait. It responded like a predator long-caged, eager, coiled, furious to be free. Turrets unfolded with deliberate fury. Beam capacitors charged along the spine. The flak grid, a lattice of micropulse cannons and ion netting, activated, creating a bubble of kill zone space around the dreadnought. The first wave struck and evaporated. Erin winced. They're going to throw more. They always do, Marcus said. He turned to her. Send a message. She blinked. To who? He didn't smile. Didn't flinch. To everyone. Erin moved to comms. Her fingers trembled, but only once. Then she tapped the key. The voice of the righteous memory roared across subspace, not Concord-coded, not encrypted, not filtered. Just pure, unfiltered Terran signal. Ancient dialect. Earthborn tone. This is the righteous memory. We were not destroyed. We were buried. And now, we burn. The words echoed across the command deck. Erin felt them in her chest like a thunderclap, an ancestral memory finally spoken aloud. Even Thorne, the hardened tactician, sat back with a flicker of something behind her steel eyes. Awe. Or maybe fear. The message cascaded. On Hallanth Prime, political servers choked. On Kothari moons, rebel sects activated. In Virek-controlled colonies, elders whispered forbidden names. And in the archive crypts beneath the Concord Citadel, ancient servers, once purged, once sealed, lit up with the last warning ever encoded by Terran resistance forces. Threshold event, confirmed. Below that, humanity is no longer contained. They watched the broadcast in silence. Within the deepest chamber of the Concord High Council on Hallanth Prime, beneath kilometers of crystalline stone, shielded by temporal phase barriers and neural dampers, 12 figures stood before a projection of the righteous memory. It moved like a storm, uncompromising, beautiful in its brutality. The projection looped again. Every time the ship's forward lance erupted in red light, it cast long, eerie shadows across the council chamber. The Virek delegate clicked its lower mandibles in agitation. Its voice came through the translator as a ripple of vibration and disdain. This cannot stand. The humans weren't supposed to remember, hissed another. This one Hallanth. Its blue-toned flesh quivered with restrained fury. They weren't supposed to survive. The Kothari's response came in melodic tones, overlaid with 12 strands of subharmonic thought. It was supposed to be a myth. The Echo Sentinels were declared extinguished before the First Ascendant era. The human archives were purged. Purged? A Virek scoffed. We scattered their bones into neutron stars. They buried it, said a Hallanth observer, stepping forward, High Arbiter Seleuan of the Outer Rings, once a diplomat to Earth before the purges. His voice was slower, more precise. But they didn't kill it. You warned us what they were like when cornered. You warned us what they were like when cornered. And you didn't listen. Across the chamber, a synthetic envoy from the Protocol Intelligence Corps flickered into view. Its voice was flat, emotionless. The Arc Division is reactivating dormant relay systems in no less than 39 sectors. Resistance nodes across former Terran territories have come online. The resurgence is decentralized, viral in nature. It is culturally encoded, not tactical. The words hit like cold metal. A pause. Then, from the shadows, a voice older than the chamber itself, Counselor Virek Thal. His carapace was inlaid with ancient concordal regalia. His eyes burned cold. Humanity is doing what we feared they would. They're not fighting a war. They're lighting a reckoning. Aboard the Righteous Memory, the aftermath of the engagement drifted like wreckage. The space around Saphar Station was strewn with the husks of Concord drones, twisted, inert, their flight systems frozen in eternal spirals. The two support frigates had jumped away before the main lance charged for a third time. It had not been a battle. It had been an awakening. Inside, the bridge ran low with conversation. Tactician Thorne recalibrated target vectors. Eska monitored the recharging coil banks. Every console hummed with newfound purpose. Erin sat on the edge of the bridge dais, staring at a display cycling through intercepted comms bursts. The weight of it all settled in her chest. Not fear, something deeper. Awe. A terrible, trembling awe. Her words had cracked the dam. And now voices once smothered by time and tyranny were rising like a flood. She could feel the fracture lines spreading across the map, worlds lighting up in gold and red, colonies long considered dead sending back a single signal. "We are listening." "Thorne," Marcus said from the helm, "status on the Hallant relays?" Thorne didn't look up. "Ghost-encoded beacons are live. 9 enclaves confirmed. A few using pre-Concord encryption ciphers we haven't seen in epochs." Marcus turned toward Erin. His voice wasn't praise. It was realization. "You gave them more than a signal. You gave them permission." Erin's throat tightened. "Then we give them more." She stood, walked forward slowly, her boots echoing against steel more ancient than anything left on Earth. "Open a comms channel. Non-targeted. Full spectrum. Let them hear this." Marcus inclined his head. She didn't speak from notes. She didn't need to. "This is Dr. Erin Voss, Terran citizen. Exoarchaeologist. I have seen the bones of buried lies. I have touched the past the Concord tried to erase. And I tell you now, we were here before the stars had names, and we are here still. You are not alone. Stand up. Dig deep. Remember." Across the galaxy, the message unfurled like a spark in dry fields. On the outer deck of a Concord patrol vessel near the Chiral Expanse, a junior officer froze mid-sentence. The broadcast crackled through auxiliary channels, unfiltered, unapproved. He stared at the screen, lips parted, as the words echoed through his headset. Then, without a word, he removed his rank pin and left it on the console. On the ruins of Salira, 3, a farming moon where Terrans once knelt before Concord inspectors, children pointed to the sky as underground transmitters flared to life. On the deep ice caverns of Telos Hectra, resistance monks knelt in silence, tears carving paths down frost-covered cheeks. On the broken shipyards of Arca Minor, a fleet tech reached into a buried crate and unwrapped a sealed sidearm marked with the symbol of the rebellion. The galaxy remembered. Back on Hallant Prime, the council chamber shook, not from motion, but from tension. Counselor Virek Thal's voice dropped to a growl. "Activate Scorch Doctrine. Initiate parallax cascade across all known Terran Alliance systems. Silence the colonies. Collapse the enclaves. If they want memory, give them fire." The Kothari delegate hesitated. "This will ignite open war." "It already has," Thal snapped. Behind them, a terminal blinked to life. A technician, barely old enough to have seen the last border incursion, froze. "Sir, we have a ping from Sol." Heads turned. Breath held. "That relay's dead," said one Virek. "No longer." The terminal zoomed in. A pulse. Rhythmic. Ancient. It carried harmonic structures layered with frequencies only humans had once used. Raw, chaotic, defiantly unrefined. It was designed before the Concord had even coined the phrase galactic unification. It screamed of origin. Designation. SOL core activation. The Earth relay, dead for 91,000 years, was online. And something was coming through. Not just a signal. Not just another dreadnought. A fleet. Flying Terran colors no Concord database had on file. Burning ancient fire. Returning home. The fleet that emerged from the Sol relay didn't match any known configuration. No registration codes. No transponder signatures. No standard comms protocol. But the moment they breached Rhea's space, the stars knew. Erin watched from the Righteous Memory's forward viewport, her breath caught in her throat. There were 30 ships. Maybe more. Some massive, some jagged and lean. None resembled the sleek, symmetrical lines of Concord vessels. They moved like predators out of time, unpredictable, angular, their hulls dark with age and soot, seams of plasma pulsing beneath carbon-scored armor. Every inch of their design spoke of desperation, of survival at the edge of extinction. No flair. No ornament. Only function. Brutal and necessary. Marcus stood beside her, arms folded. His jaw clenched. "Those aren't Ark," she said. No, he replied, eyes locked forward. Those are old core. She turned to face him. You mean? Pre-Exodus. He nodded. The ones who never made it off Earth. When the Concord swept through, most fled. Ark retreated. Resistance splintered. But some stayed. We always thought they were lost in the planetary quarantines. On the bridge behind them, Tactician Thorne whistled low. Those are grave walkers, she muttered. They're legend. Ships too mean to die, too angry to stop. Some say they drifted through dead systems for centuries, tearing apart anything that still flew Concord colors. Others say they sing to each other in code we've long forgotten. Erin frowned. What? Thorne turned, her gaze serious. Ghost ships. Ancient dreadnoughts and war hulks so old their AI cores degraded into something half-lucid. Most Concord archives list them as folklore Terran myths. But they were real. And they were dangerous enough to be forgotten on purpose. The largest ship among them drifted into full view. It was a fortress in motion, spined like a sea creature, 3 central spires rotating on a gravity-locked axis. Fragmented subcores spun in synchronized pulses, glowing a deep, molten blue. Even without weapons primed, its presence was overwhelming. A low hum permeated the bridge of the righteous memory, not through speakers, but through the hull itself. A resonance. Like 2 old beasts recognizing each other after a long, buried silence. Marcus stepped forward. Hail them. Use old burst binary. Make it personal. Erin swallowed and keyed the input. This is the righteous memory. Identify. A long pause. Then, static gave way to a flicker. The image on-screen sharpened into the face of a human, weathered, bearded, marked. One eye was cybernetic. The other held fury and memory. This is Commander Idrin Vale of the Free Soul Corps, the man said. We heard your voice. We heard the call. And we remembered what they did to us. Marcus exhaled slowly, like a weight was shifting on his spine. Erin stepped forward. We thought Earth was gone. So did we, Idrin said. Until the day we stopped being afraid. He leaned closer to the screen. And now, we're done hiding. The combined Terran fleets, Ark Division, Free Soul Corps, and the Righteous Memory, rendezvoused near the fractured belt of the Chiral Expanse. There, in the orbit of old mining husks and derelict cargo habitats, strategy emerged from silence. Erin stood in the central command chamber with Marcus, Idrin, and a half-dozen Ark operatives whose faces bore the quiet of those who'd lost too much to speak casually. Tactical overlays floated in the air between them, sector maps scarred with past battles, Concord patrol routes sketched like predator trails, and resistance beacon triangulations flickering with age and interference. Some feeds blinked red where entire enclaves had gone silent. Others pulsed with encoded chants from rebel strongholds that refused to die quietly. Outside the station, Concord scout vessels blinked off sensors, retreating into subspace corridors rather than face what now hovered above them. They're already running, said Thorne. Which means they're already preparing to strike somewhere else. Arc Tactician Villar, a compact man with iron-gray skin and a voice like sand, tapped the sequence on the display. Concord suppression units are hitting soft targets. Civilians. Data caches. They've ignited a parallax cascade in the Telos sector. That means data sterilizations, orbital bombardment of unaligned archives. Old world erasure. Eska growled. They're trying to burn the memory before it spreads. They won't burn fast enough, Marcus said. Erin nodded. We gave people belief. You can't cauterize that. Belief is good, Idrin added. But belief without teeth is just a prayer. He glanced toward the viewport, where the jagged silhouettes of his fleet drifted like broken gods. Some of us buried entire cities beneath our own feet just to keep the old codes safe. We didn't survive to watch others hesitate. So what's our first strike? From the far end of the room, a voice came over the encrypted channel, gravel-edged, commanding. Hit them where they've built their lie, said Admiral Myrov, his face flickering into view. The Archive Core. Halanth Prime. Erin stiffened. That's the most protected installation in the entire Concord schema. Exactly, Myrov said. If we breach it, if we expose what they've erased, we don't just win a battle. We get their truth. And in a regime built on memory control, that's the only kill shot that matters. Marcus turned to Idrin. How many ships can you spare? The old commander glanced at the battle group behind him. Not many, but enough to break something sacred. Thorne smiled without mirth. We don't need to destroy their fleet, just their face. Erin looked up at the hollow display of Halanth. Her chest tightened. Somewhere in that orbiting web of steel and silence was the truth, the real truth. Not the textbooks. Not the Concord scripts recited in schools. The one her parents were imprisoned for whispering about. A luminous planet wrapped in orbital rings, surrounded by mirrored defense satellites. And deep beneath its polar surface, the core. Thousands of years of stolen history. A machine that fed lies to 1,000 worlds. A scalpel strike, she said. Marcus nodded. We burn through their outer wall. Plant the payload. Extract. Myra's face tightened. This will bring everything they've got. Good, Marcus said. Then they won't be looking anywhere else. A heavy silence filled the room. Then Idrin stepped forward. One burn. One strike. And the lie falls apart. The fleets moved. Toward Halanth. Toward the memory vaults built on the bones of stolen truth. Because they were done being silent. And the galaxy had finally started listening. They breached the edge of Halanth space under silence and shadow. No grand declarations. No fanfare. Just the slow tightening of a noose around the Concord's throat. The combined fleet fanned out like ghost fire, Arc Division attack cutters running flanking sweeps, free Soul Core ships emerging from dark space folds with ancient stealth drives humming low, and the righteous memory at the center like a blade unsheathed. To outside observers, it would have looked like a fleet deployment glitch. A ripple in gravimetric telemetry. Then a swell of distortion. Then 27 Terran signatures blooming into orbit, running dark and fast. In the war room, Marcus stood over the strike schematic. Lights from the tactical interface lit the hard lines of his face. 3 vectors, he said. North Polar Orbital Gate, Undersea Data Transmission Relay, and Primary Tower Spire. We hit all 3 within seconds. No time for Concord to triangulate. Idrin leaned over the table, eyes scanning the rotating projection of Halanth Prime. We'll take the gate. Eska's team can run the relay. You handle the spire. Erin swallowed. And the core. Myrov's voice cracked through the comms. His face was cast in shadow, filtered through half a dozen encryption layers. We drop a blacklink virus through the tower spire. If it hits deep enough, the archive will purge its own integrity protocols trying to seal the breach. Every file the Concord ever falsified gets dumped to public netspace. Globally. Permanently. Thorne crossed her arms. Poetic. No, Marcus said, voice low. Human. The strike began not with fire, but with silence. Concord's satellites blinked offline one by one, taken out by ancient Terran malware so buried in history that it registered as background radiation. They didn't explode, they simply stopped existing in the network. 1,000 eyes suddenly blind. On Halanth's shadow side, free Soul Core ships detached from the gravitational dark of the second moon. Their hulls were laced with radar-disruptive plasma veins. Their engines sang low in old-world tones, frequency bands the Concord no longer monitored. Arc Division cutters deployed Trojan drones from slingshot launchers, each drone latching onto orbital hangars and vomiting jamming mist into the data cloud. The righteous memory descended next. No atmospheric burn. No sonic boom. Just a terrible weight moving fast through the clouds, silent and inevitable. Inside, Erin stood at the observation deck, hands locked on the rail. Her stomach twisted as the ship began its controlled fall. Fear curled low in her gut, but so did awe. This wasn't a strike. It was history reborn, and she was in its throat. Somewhere between terror and purpose, she found herself gripping the rail tighter, not to steady herself, but to witness. The ship didn't groan. It growled. Marcus stood at the helm. His hands gripped the primary throttle. Data overlays flooded the screen. Wind vectors, plasma fields, cannon paths. He tuned it out. Trajectory locked. Lance online. Drop window in 7. Outside, the mirrored orbital rings lit up. Automated defense systems activated. Anti-ship plasma rail guns rotated to engage. But they were too slow. The righteous memory rolled beneath the first arc of fire and returned it with interest. Its main lance lit the stratosphere like a red sun. The orbital ring shattered. Thousands of tons of debris rained down on Halanth's upper hemisphere. Concord broadcast towers, once the pillars of unassailable authority, tumbled like broken bones. The spire breach came moments later. Dropships didn't land, they slammed. Mag clamps drove into titanium walls. Breaching claws spun and tore into the command tower's side. Marcus was first through the breach, pulse rifle raised. Inside, everything was pristine. The interior of the archive tower was a shrine to Concord order. White polymer walls, gleaming black floors, soft lighting tuned to Halanth's circadian comfort cycles. There were no signs. No dirt. No deviation. Then the alarm screamed. Concord marshals poured from hidden corridors, armor glinting, rifles hot. They moved like machines, tight formations, sweeping fire arcs, no vocal commands. Cold. Perfect. ruthless, built for crowd suppression and psychological dominance. But they weren't ready for Marcus. They didn't issue warnings. They opened fire. Erin dove to the side, rolling behind a column. Heat singed past her ear. Marcus moved like he had never stopped fighting. A martial charge, Marcus caught the man's wrist, twisted, and slammed him into the wall hard enough to dent steel. Villar and Thorne moved at his flanks, precision embodied. "Esca, report," Marcus barked. Esca's voice crackled through the link. "Relay secured. Data spike transmitting. But they're jamming local bandwidth. We'll need the uplink." "Idrin. Gates disabled," the old commander replied. "Their escape window's gone." Marcus turned. Erin planted. She nodded. No hesitation. She ran. Down corridors that whispered with hidden speakers. Past rows of Concord history murals showing smiling humans joining interstellar congresses. Past sterile perfection. At the top of the spire, she found the uplink port, guarded by a single marshal who looked more confused than ready. He raised his weapon. She fired first. She reached the interface and pulled the spike from her belt. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Her mother had once whispered stories about the old wars cautiously, in the dark, like the words themselves might be illegal. Erin remembered her voice. The warmth, the fear, and the hope. She tightened her grip. She slammed it into the port. The tower lights dimmed, then flickered, then changed. From soft white to red. From calm to warning. The hum began, not from the spike, but from the planet. A low, resonant vibration that moved through her bones. The archive core had felt the breach. Across the galaxy, the truth erupted. On rim worlds where children had only ever heard of the rebellion as a conspiracy myth, classrooms lit up with footage of Terran insurgents, not monsters, but men and women hugging families, building shelters, bleeding in the mud. On Halanth, massive projections played across the cities, and censored footage, long-buried files, massacre reports, the names of those disappeared. On the Concord capital vessel orbiting Oris Prime, High Command staff choked on silence as their own screens turned against them. Every world, every outpost, every station across the Concord sprawl saw the same message. Even on Olithis Station, a Concord-loyal academic hub, students froze mid-lecture as the walls began playing footage their textbooks never acknowledged. On Erat Helvi, a former Terran colony now ruled by Virek officials, workers paused, their hands shaking as names of the massacred scrolled past their visors. Disbelief, grief, rage, and then resolve. You were never wrong to resist. You were just buried. Now you are seen. Erin's voice, recorded before the strike. Carried now by systems even the Concord no longer remembered how to shut down. The archive core screamed. Its substructure failed. Memory threads corrupted themselves trying to re-encrypt. The failsafes panicked, opened bypasses, and dumped everything into the net. Lies spilled like blood. And the galaxy didn't look away. They watched. They remembered. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Concord had no voice to answer back. Only silence. And silence had never been so loud. The Concord didn't fall in a single day, but something inside it broke that day, and everyone heard the snap. Across 1,000 systems, their diplomats were turned away from doors that once opened without knocking. Military checkpoints were ignored. Propaganda towers were painted over in defiance. Some were splashed with the sigil of the old rebellion, a broken chain over a rising sun. Others simply bore a name, Erin Voss, not as a saint, not as a savior, but as a voice that told the truth. And the truth had burned the stars. The righteous memory drifted high above Halanth, its bulk cloaked in defense haze and false sensor trails. Below, the planet shimmered with unrest, fires from orbital debris, columns of smoke where Concord uplink towers had once stood, and pulsing lights where resistance gatherings now formed openly. Erin stood in the observation ring, looking down. Her name was painted on resistance banners across the surface. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't expected it. But it wasn't vanity, what she felt was weight. The weight of all the names that had come before her, crushed in silence. And now, echoed in paint and fire. The viewport curved around her like a giant eye, giving her the full sweep of the planet. She traced the continents with her gaze, the smooth curve of the northern plate, the glittering sea bands. She saw lines of movement where cities used to pulse in rhythm with Concord cycles. Now, they pulsed with something else. Behind her, the bridge buzzed in a strange kind of calm. Arc Division agents moved like chess pieces, deliberate, confident. Free Soul Corps officers huddled over scattered maps, trading ration packs for intelligence feeds, drinking scavenged coffee from cracked mugs with ancient emblems. At the front viewport, Marcus stood alone, arms crossed, staring. She approached, wordless for a moment. "They're organizing," he said without turning, "all over the surface. They don't know what they're building yet. But it's theirs, not ours. That's how it should be." She nodded slowly. "It doesn't feel real yet." "It's not," Marcus said. "But it will be." She stepped beside him. "They'll retaliate." "Yes," he said, "but not everywhere. Not at once." He turned, finally. His eyes were tired, but clear. "We forced them to choose. The truth doesn't just break power. It fragments it, makes it brittle. They'll crack trying to hold it together." Erin stared at the planet. "Then we don't have to hold the line." "No," Marcus said. "We just need to light more fires." Deep below Halantha's capital, in a chamber older than the Concord's current charter, a crisis council convened. The air was heavy with filtered ozone. Projector nodes lit the table with real-time riot maps, economic collapse projections, and military redeployment reports, all marked in red. Most were blinking. Virak Thal paced before the group, his carapace dulled by stress, and tinny twitching in frustration. His voice rattled like distant thunder. "They've taken our monopoly on narrative," he growled. "We spent millennia crafting consensus, curating memory, purging error. And now, to show children the old blood." He slammed a clawed hand on the table. "We cannot fight what people choose to believe." A Halanth noble, draped in bioluminescent sashes, snarled. "Then we kill their figurehead, the archaeologist. Publicly. Make her a martyr in name only." Silence rippled across the chamber. Then, from the rear wall, a voice spoke, soft, mechanical, ancient. Designation, Obsidian Protocol. One of the original archival intelligences from the Concord's foundation. A relic they had buried but never deleted. "No." Heads turned. A projection flickered to life. An intelligence construct, massive, angular, made of memory fragments and security protocols no longer standard, hovered into the space. Its optical sensor glowed blue. "We tried to kill the idea before," it said. "When we burned the rebellion from Earth's skies. When we glassed New Damascus. When we erased the Ashen Treaty from public record. And still, they remember." The council held its breath. "There is only one strategy left." Thal hissed. "What?" "We surrender control." Gasps. Rage. Voices overlapping in disbelief. "Not power," the construct clarified. "Control. We let the noise bloom. Encourage fracture. Feed tribalism. Give humans what they crave, independence. Conflict. Identity." The Halanth noble sneered. "You would create anarchy?" "No," the construct said. "We create volume. Enough of it to bury the signal." Thal narrowed his eyes. "And if that fails?" "Then we disappear," the construct said. "Into the cracks we widened. And wait to rise again." No one had a better idea. At the edge of Concord space, beyond trade lanes and scan networks, a scrapyard city spun in orbit around a dead star. Rust bloomed across its hulls like moss. Solar sails made from shattered station panels stretched into the void. Inside, thousands lived between decay and survival, mechanics, refugees, traders, and those who remembered when Earth still had a name. In one corner of a broken habitation ring, a child sat on a crate watching a screen older than she was. Her family had fled 4 systems in as many years. Her older brother had disappeared during a conscription raid. No one said it, but they all knew he wasn't coming back. Her parents knelt behind her, frozen. The broadcast played again. Old rebellion footage. Names. Places. Then a woman's voice. "You were never wrong to resist. You were just buried. Now you are seen." The child didn't understand every word. But she understood one thing. The people on the screen had fought. They'd remembered. She repeated the last line, quietly. Then again, her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. Her father nodded. In the hall behind them, more people gathered to watch. A whisper began. Not loud, but growing. Elsewhere, the ARC division activated deep cell networks across 7 sectors. Free Soulcore ships dispersed to abandoned colonies, bearing seeds of memory and mechits in equal measure. On Mars, Myrov oversaw the reconstruction of resistance infrastructure that hadn't breathed in centuries. And aboard the Righteous Memory, Erin stood before a crowd of officers, colonists, refugees, and former enemies turned allies. She didn't give a speech. She just held up a data slate. "Truth," she said. The room held still. For a breath. Then someone clapped. Another joined. A murmur rolled through the crowd like a tide beginning to rise. Not loud, not triumphant, but certain, and uploaded another cache. Because the Concord wasn't dead. Not yet. But it was no longer alone in the dark. And the galaxy was done whispering. The echoes had turned into fire. And the fire was spreading. Still growing. Not done yet. Chapter 10. We never left. The Concord launched counterstrikes within the week. Orbital bombardments rippled through fringe systems like Alaribi, where glass domes over salt crystal cities turned to vapor in minutes, and Habit's Reach, a sanctuary moon whose libraries were reduced to cratered silence. Cities that had once murmured with unrest now crackled beneath the weight of high-atmo kinetic strikes. Covert assassination swept through still loyal enclaves, judges, professors, ex-diplomats, anyone who might question the silence from above. Psychological operations flooded civilian nets. Concord message weavers deployed fractured narratives, undermining the rebellion by claiming it had been staged, foreign, false. But it was too late. For every world they cracked down on, 3 more slipped away. Not in open war, but in withdrawal. Quiet resistance. Infrastructure folded inwards. Black market fleets stopped answering Concord priority pings. Trade federations severed financial ties. Planetary governors failed to report. Public holiday parades swapped official banners for old symbols, the broken chain, the sunburst, a fist of roots reaching from fractured stone. The Concord wasn't fighting humans anymore. They were fighting momentum. On Halland Prime, the archive core lay dark. Once a monolith of false stability, it now stood as a hollowed monument. Its towers, rising like fangs from the capital's spine, were still structurally intact. But inside, its walls no longer whispered curated lies. The heat of 1,000,000 falsified memories had bled out. No humming servers. No spooling feedback. In the central chamber, where the first viral payload had detonated, fragments of Concord's fractured history still pulsed across wall projections. Incomplete. Unfiltered. Real. Erin Voss stood alone beneath the ceiling where the galaxy had watched her speak. No guards. No advisors. Just memory. Around her, data nodes flickered erratically. Images bled in and out, maps of erased colonies, surveillance footage marked with outdated clearance tags, execution orders once marked with falsified coordinates. Some of the records were centuries old. Others were recent, too recent. Erin didn't flinch. She let them play. Let them haunt the chamber. Let them scream what had been buried. Footsteps approached. Marcus. He stopped beside her, arms folded. The core's still leaking. Another data ghost emerged this morning from the Varelian vaults. I didn't think those even existed. She nodded. They weren't supposed to. None of this was. He watched her. You've been here all night. I needed to see how deep it went. And she turned. It never ended. It just looped. History on repeat. Every lie reinforcing the last. This place wasn't just storage, it was a script. And we tore it out mid-performance. He smirked. There's talk of a council forming. Not Concord. Something smaller. Transparent. Decentralized. Open to all species. She raised an eyebrow. That sounds like rebuilding. Are you ready for that? I'm ready to make sure we don't forget again. The first new banners rose on Telos Hectra. Once sterilized by orbital Concord beams, Telos had been deemed uninhabitable. But they came back. Survivors, descendants, salvagers. They rebuilt on ash. And when they flew their first planetary signal, it wasn't under Earth's old flag, or any flag at all. They flew colors no system had seen in millennia, a black field split by a white diagonal scar. In the center, a stylized flame curled inside an open eye. Some interpreted it as vigilance. Others saw rebirth. Among the Telos diaspora, it became a mark of grieving that refused to fade. Remembrance. News of it spread across freighter channels and encrypted pulses. It was art and declaration. Memory woven into design. They didn't proclaim sovereignty. They embodied it. Other worlds followed. In the Skull Drift, asteroid mining colonies held a week of silence for lost languages, then painted every structure in fragments of extinct dialects. On Valen's Reach, poets broadcast in censored verses for the first time in 800 years. On Araksh, a former Concord fortress world, captured prisoners were released in daylight. Their first steps outside were met with flowers, not guards. This wasn't unity. It was something stronger. Freedom informed by memory. And amidst it all, the righteous memory flew again. It didn't roar into orbit like a predator. It glided. Its hull still bore scorch marks, its systems cobbled together by techs using ancient schematics and modern intuition. But its silhouette was known now. revered, feared. A ship that should have been extinct. A ghost made real. It flew not as a warship, but as a carrier of legacy. Its crew was no longer soldiers alone. They were archivists, pilgrims, veterans who had chosen memory over vengeance, and youth raised on fragments of forbidden history. Each had a reason to fly. Each carried a piece of what the Concord had tried to erase. Its hold was converted into a mobile archive. Every sector it visited, its crew beamed down fragments of data, cultural records, censored history, languages thought extinct. In some places, its arrival triggered parades. In others, tears. On the water world of Silene, every building faced the sky during its pass. On Corvani Station, children recited the old Earth calendars beneath the glow of its engines. Everywhere it passed, people looked up, not in fear, in awe. Erin often stood by the central viewport during those passes, silent, watching the faces turn upward, faces of strangers she'd never meet but somehow knew. And in those moments, she didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like a witness, but in recognition, because they knew the truth now. They had never been alone. They had never been erased. They had never been forgotten. They had just been waiting, waiting to remember, waiting to rise, waiting to burn bright again, because they had never left. And now, the galaxy would never let them be buried again.